Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Abigail, and I am the Participant Services Coordinator at InterExchange. And today I'm joined by my colleague Fatima. Fatima will I'll let you introduce yourself as we kick off the presentation.
Hi everyone, my name is Fatima Rodriguez and I am the Communications and Recruitment Coordinator here at InterExchange. And I'm excited to show you or to talk a little bit more about how to create successful resumes and cover letters. I know that right now things like there's less networking opportunities, so it's really important that you have a great resume and a great cover letter as that will serve as your first impression during your internship search.
Great. Yeah, we're really excited to bring this webinar series to you. Today's webinar is the third of 10 that we are conducting this spring. The series of webinars covers everything from searching for internships in the US to creating cover letters and resumes, as we're going to talk about today, and also about creating a LinkedIn profile, basically all of the aspects of pulling together an international internship application. So for those of you who might be unfamiliar with InterExchange or Career Training USA, we are a nonprofit organization based in New York City, and our mission is to promote cross-cultural exchange for students overseas to come to the United States, and also for students in the US to go overseas and partake in programs. The Career Training USA program particularly works with students who have internships and are seeking to come to the United States to do an internship or a traineeship. Of course, with the pandemic, there have been a lot fewer opportunities for people to come to and travel and experience internships in person or in other countries. But we know there's still a lot of interest in these types of programs, as well as coming and interning in the US. So we want to make sure to provide resources that you can use during this time, so that you continue to think about interning, not necessarily coming to the US quite yet, but preparing to do so in the future. So we hope that this topic today will help you to think about what you need to do to prepare to come for your internship in the US. The first step a lot of the times is creating a resume and a cover letter. So a bit of housekeeping before I turn it over to Fatima to begin the presentation. Everyone is muted, so if you have any questions, please type them into the chat box, and we will read them off as they come in if they're pertaining to that portion of the presentation. We do have a couple of breaks throughout the presentation for questions. So we will try to answer a lot of the questions that come in during those breaks. So if there's something you'd like to ask that isn't related, just feel free to type it in the chat box as you think of them, and we'll try to answer those. And if you do have to leave a little early, or maybe you just joined and you've missed the intro, this session is recorded, and everyone who is registered will get a recording of this session. So don't worry, you can rewatch anything. With that, Fatima, I'll turn it over to you to get started with the presentation.
Thank you so much, Abby, for that introduction. So I'm going to move on into the outline of the session to discuss a little bit more about what we'll be discussing today. So we'll go in and talk about the purpose and the uses of a resume, different resume types, tips for resume creation, and then in the second half of the presentation, we're going to discuss again the purpose and uses of a cover letter formats, and tips for cover letter creation as well. And then at the end of the session, we'll open the floor up to any questions that you may have. But again, feel free to type in any questions you may have as we go through the presentation as well. So we wanted to start the presentation with a little bit of a resume one-on-one, just so you can get a little bit acclimated to the difference between what a resume versus a CV is, or any other kind of purposes for the resume. So in most of the world, resumes and CVs are simply synonymous of each other. However, in the US, a resume is a bit different than a CV. A resume typically is a one-page summary of your work experience and background relevant to the job that you are applying to. While a CV is a longer academic diary that includes all of your experiences, certificates, and publications that you've done, it's typically used in the field of academia where a resume is going to be more relevant nearly to all interns or trainees who may be applying for an international experience through Career Training USA. Um, Resume is typically your introduction to the employer that you are applying to. It showcases your summary of skills, education, professional history, and any certifications that is relevant to the internship that you are applying to. Again, summary is a key word here. Hiring managers look at resumes for less than 30 seconds on average, so you want to make sure that your resume stands out. And there are typically two uses for a resume. And today this presentation will focus more on the first use, which is applying for a job or internship, but it is also an important tool for networking. So let's say if someone has an opening in their company or a friend has an opening in their company, having your resume on hand or ready to send is a really important tool to build a virtual network. So one might ask, "Hi, can I see your resume?" So they would know whether or not it makes sense to forward your contact details to that hiring manager. And so for that reason, it really makes sense to keep your resume fresh and up to date. You may want to update it on average around 3 times a year to ensure that your education, professional experience, or any other relevant information is up to date and correct. So it's a lot easier to have your resume ready to go and send it off than to wait at the last minute trying to make any updates that has happened over the past 2 years, or maybe you forgot some important responsibilities that you've had. So again, updating your resume um, more frequently will definitely be beneficial for you. So even if you're not looking for an internship or you're not looking for an opportunity, make sure you go back to that resume and it's up to date. So I also wanted to highlight what not to include on your resume. The scope of this presentation, again, is for internships and traineeships in the US. So there is a little bit of cultural differences in how in how you're applying and what to include or what not to include in your resume. In some countries, it might be appropriate to include some of these details on a resume, but in the scope of the United States, you may not want to put, a photo of yourself, your date of birth, whether or not you're married, your gender, religion, or essentially any unnecessary personal information. If it's not relevant to your ability as a candidate, you don't want to include that on your resume. Employers should also not ask you for any of this information and is actually not allowed because of hiring laws against discrimination. So putting this information on a resume might actually exclude you from being moved on exclude your resume from being moved on to the hiring manager. So you really just want to make sure your resume is about your skills and expertise and not necessarily something that's more personal. So now we're going to move on to the different types of resumes. Chronological is the most common and probably the best form to use, but there are other forms of resume that exist, such as functional and a hybrid. So depending on your field, the best choice may vary. I would definitely look at the vibe of the company, and if you think a traditional or creative style would best resonate, that would be probably the best use. That that type of resume would definitely be the best use. And there are definitely different ways to present your resume. Chronological is just the best for most people, but not necessarily for everyone. So with that, we'll dive into an example of a chronological resume. So as I said again, chronological is um, typically the best option. And this is probably the type of resume that looks familiar to most people. As you can see, it's easy to read. it goes straight to the point, and it targets to the different positions you are looking for and the related responsibility. And as you can see here, it's segmented into different areas. The contact info is at the top. Here you want to include your email, your phone number, your LinkedIn profile, or a link to your LinkedIn profile. And you want to make sure that you provide your professional contact information. Not your personal contact information. You want to make sure that this is the contact information that that hiring managers can reach you and contact you. And you can also make this section of your resume a little bigger in format and even bold it, just because, again, it's really important that you don't want to hide this section and ensure that, when the hiring manager likes your background and feels that you're a great fit for their company, they can easily contact you and reach you for the next step of the internship hiring process. And then you move into the summary where you briefly talk about yourself. The summary is typically 3 to 4 lines. In this example, it is in bullet form, but you can also type it in paragraph form. But really, no more than 3 to 4 lines. It's just a quick snapshot of who you are as a candidate. Now you'll move on into the education section and the professional experience. These sections are in reverse chronological order. So depending on how long you've been out of school, you might see the experience section a little bit longer than the education section. And I just want to remind you, that anytime you add something to your resume, think about what you might want to take off to keep your resume at one page. Just remember that your resume is a summary of your background and your expertise, and you just want it, and again, your hiring manager just briefly looks at it for 30 seconds. So you want it to appeal right away to whoever is hiring you. And at the bottom of this type of resume, you also want to include any volunteer experience, maybe language skills that you have, or anything else that you'd like to note that would be important to highlight for you as a candidate. And now we're going to move on to the functional type of resume. It looks a little similar to the chronological, but there are some important differences. So at the top, again, you'll see the contact information. It's a little bit bigger. It's definitely bolded. But then as you move on to the summary, which is a little bit longer, it's about 5 lines, and it pulls out specific skills that might be relevant to the position that the candidate is applying for. It's italicized and bolded, so it really jumps out on the resume and emphasizes what skills you have to offer. Next is the education section. This is a lot more concise than the chronological resume. It just lists the education and then moves on from there. After this is the skills section, and it's completely different as far as experience. So instead of past roles, the bulk of your resume is your current expertise. This section groups the different skills that this person has and maybe pulls from different experiences. So some of these bullets might be from internship experience, some might be from schoolwork, some might even be from volunteer experiences, but then they fall under leadership skills or organization skills or even interpersonal communication skills. And again, it just really this type of resume focuses on the skills that you have developed. So instead of focusing on your experience within previous roles, your focus is on the skills that you possess and draw examples of how you've used them across different settings. So even though you're not focusing on your experience, you still do want to put your work history on the resume at the end. And this type of resume may be better if you have large gaps in your resume or you have shifted dramatically between positions and the connections may not be that obvious. Or let's say if maybe that your past history your past work history, or your education, if it doesn't necessarily translate obviously to what you're applying for, this job, you might opt to do a functional resume and show that you have leadership skills instead, or that you have interpersonal skills or organization and planning skills, all of the skills that the job posting is asking for. I think it's really important in a functional resume also to quantify some of these skills. So if you have leadership skills, you should figure out a way to quantify maybe how many people you've led or how many teams you've led or different events and sizes and the scope, and also the scope, because sometimes when we talk about these skills, if they're not technical, it might be difficult for a host employer to understand exactly how they translate to this position, even if they absolutely do. And you know they do. You just want to make sure that you're able to articulate that in the skill summary section. And then here at the bottom is the work history. So you still, again, include your work history, but don't go into too much detail about what you did at each of those past positions. You just list what they were and you list the dates. And you can certainly expand upon them maybe in your cover letter, which we'll talk about later. And hopefully in the interview, once you get a chance to actually get in the door and interview with the company. But here in the functional resume, you're going to focus on the skills more than the actual positions you held. So a hybrid resume is just what it is. It's the mix of the two. It starts with a summary section at the top, and the summary section again is about 4 lines, but it does include some specific skills that are pulled out and highlighted to the host employer. But then after the summary section, we move into the education and experience, which is very similar to the chronological version where they go in reverse chronological order. The bullets in the experience section pull out some of the specific experiences that the candidate did in their time as, as a paralegal or as a legal secretary. So you have some of the components from both of those. And this is great for someone who has a little bit of professional experience that might be related to the position, but not a whole lot. So you can still use skills you picked up and maybe other industries or positions. And you can also highlight those and showcase yourself as a candidate that way, but also showing that you still do have some related experience. I do think that the importance for a hybrid resume is the formatting and making sure that you keep it organized and you keep it clean and you make it so that the host employer can still find important information, that the summary is still there, the education is still there, your contact information is also there. And this is a good example where it's separated with the skills on the top and the chronological on the bottom. You can do it in 2 different columns, but it's just very important that you're going to use a hybrid, that when you're using a hybrid resume, to just keep it organized. So speaking of formatting, there are some tips we want to share about resume formats that maybe you've seen before or maybe you've heard, but we just want to reinforce, should you keep your resume concise. If you think you're sorry, if you think about your resume or you think about your LinkedIn profile, your resume is a scaled down version of your LinkedIn profile. So maybe your LinkedIn profile might have all of your history, all of your skills that you've done, or all the skills that you have and the work experience that you've done. But the resume is going to cut out some of that noise and make sure that it's just the important components of your experience and your education. And aesthetics are very important for a resume. So leave some white space. Make sure it doesn't seem overwhelming. It's not like opening up a textbook. You don't want the reviewer to be overwhelmed. You want them to be able to find the important details. You want you want it to be easily read, and to that note, make sure that you use a clear font size and a clear format, so you're keeping it in a way where the reviewer, they can find the information where the information actually is. And I also, again, wouldn't use any pictures or shapes. And that's one thing we actually did talk about earlier. Pictures being something that pictures are something that you typically don't put on a resume in the United States, but also any pictures or shapes could mess up the screening software if your resume is actually going through a computer screen or before a human screener. It might show the information incorrectly and your resume might get rejected before it is even looked at by human eyes. It's also important for that reason to make sure that all the information is consistent. The same titles, same dates, same job responsibilities that you do, you know, sorry, you want to make sure that the same titles, the same dates, the same job responsibility that you do have. So you want to keep that consistent across your resume and across your cover letter and across your LinkedIn profile. And also be careful of any acronyms as well. You want to make sure that if there is anything that's not industry specific, if it's an acronym, spell it out just to make sure that that the reviewer or the screening software can understand what it is that you're referencing to on your resume. And we've also talked about this before and seen it in some of the examples, but keep your contact details at the top of the resume. Make sure they're very easy to find and make sure their that it's the contact details that you will respond to. You don't want to put a phone number that you don't answer or don't put an email address that you won't check or look at. I think it's really important to make sure that you have first and foremost how the host employer can reach you. You also might want to include your website. If you're in the design field and you have a website, or if there's an online portfolio that you maintained. If not, I think in some of the examples we saw LinkedIn profile links. That's another great option that you can add to your resume. And I would encourage you to keep it, or I would encourage to format your resume and keep it at 1 page minimum if you're early on in your career. You at a certain point, maybe in your career, 2 pages might make more sense, but probably not until maybe you have more than 10 years of experience. So again, if you're just starting out in your professional career, maintain your resume to 1 page maximum. And that's really what you should be looking for when you're formatting your resume. Keep it at 1 page maximum and still be able to keep it clear, concise, and convey your professional experiences to the potential hiring manager. All right, so the resume content. So my initial tip here is to have a general resume template that you use. And maybe that template is longer than a page, maybe it's 2 pages, but take that template and update it for every job you apply to. And then you can remove some of the bullets that don't make sense. So you can consolidate it down to 1 page, and you can craft those bullets to what the internship posting is actually asking for. So maybe you might want to use synonyms. You might even want to tweak your past experiences, your summary, or maybe you want to mirror what the position is actually asking for. So when you're looking at the position posting, look at the skills section, look at the job aspects that appear multiple times, maybe even any preferred qualifications, those types of things in the internship posting that you would typically review, and are important to note because it shows that you understand the facets of the internship and you're going to be a good fit if you know what they're looking for. So your resume doesn't need to include everything that you've ever done. I think probably maybe 6 to 8 bullets maximum per past experience. Anything more than that, it gets harder for the reviewer to read. And there's probably more things that you have that you can certainly talk about in an interview. But for each experience section, I think 6 to 8 bullets points maximum. And these should be what you achieved in the position. not necessarily what your assigned role was. So again, you want to quantify what you did in your role as a manager, or what you did in your role that shows that you have leadership skills. Um, and you want to focus on how you're able to thrive in that position, not just what you did during that position. And we also talked about this earlier, but make sure you do update your resume quarterly, or even just like 3 times a year, and constantly, not just when you're looking for a new position. It might be a good idea to task yourself in your calendar every 3 or 4 months to update your resume, so that anytime you have um, a successful project at school, or maybe something happens that's a professional success, or your post-graduation update, it can be easily updated on your resume. Um, so that, anytime that you're looking to update your resume, or you're looking to apply for a new opportunity, you're not trying to recreate the wheel. And that you're applying, yeah, sorry, so that you're not trying to recreate that wheel. Okay, so do I need a resume and a LinkedIn profile? And we often get this question from potential interns and trainees about resumes. If they have a LinkedIn profile, they're wondering, why do they also need a resume? So a resume is tactile and concise, and it's something that before coronavirus, you would print out and you could hand it to someone. Now you would probably email your resume to someone, but it's used for informational interviews for networking, like we've talked about before, and it focuses on the skills and experience that you have, where your LinkedIn profile is going to be more expansive, and it's going to include non-relevant experience, maybe non-relevant skills, industry groups, and hobbies. And while those are all great things, and it's a great second way for someone to learn about you as a person, but if a hiring manager is looking at the job that they're hiring for, they're going to want to see skills that relate to that position. And you don't want all of these other things to crowd out the important parts of you as a candidate. So your LinkedIn profile is great, but your resume is going to be more tailored to what you're applying for. And remember that LinkedIn is still a social media platform. So be careful what you post and what you're sharing. If you wouldn't be, so think about, if you wouldn't be comfortable sharing or discussing that topic in a job interview, it probably doesn't make sense to have it on your LinkedIn profile. And we're actually going to have a webinar next Tuesday on how to build your online presence and leverage your LinkedIn profile, again at the same time, 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, on February 9th. So if you'd like to join that and learn a little bit more how to leverage your LinkedIn profile and create more of an online presence, we'll definitely guide guide you through that as well. So before we break for a round of questions, I want to talk about the application screening system. Bigger companies do use these systems just to manage the volume of resumes that come in, and these screening softwares, they look for specific informations in the skill section and in the education section, as well as the experience, and they're looking for keywords. So as I mentioned earlier, you want to look for keywords that are used in the position posting, or in the position title, or the description, maybe any words that are used more than twice, or any successful criteria for their positions. You should use those specific phrases in the posting where appropriate, instead of synonyms, just because the applicant screening systems will look for those specific keywords that are used in the postings. So in a way, you want to mirror what the job or the internship posting is posting for, because that's all the screening system knows to look for. So other keywords might be competing, industries or brands, or any notable industry associations or qualifications you know. Those are the same keywords you're going to want to use for your, excuse me, those are the same keywords you're going to want to use for in your resume. Also, the screen system, again, doesn't know what an acronym might stand for, so you really want to spell things out and maybe dumb it down for the robots just in case they are using a screening system. And some of our tips here for any time you might be submitting an application to a hiring manager at whatever company is, and knowing that it might go to a screening system, make sure that you match your resume to the job posting. Use keywords and then use bullets. Paragraphs are going to be more difficult for a screening system to phrase correctly. So where education ends and experience begins, you're going to want to use bullets because that's going to show the system where to stop and where to start looking for a new batch of information. And eventually, all of this is going to go to a human. So bullets are also easier on human eyes as well. So when you write your resume, make sure you're writing for a human who understands to you're just not filling it with buzzwords that you think the robot's going to want to see, because eventually someone, an actual human, is going to look at your resume as well. So with that, we're just going to wrap up the resume section and then shift towards cover letters. So Abigail, have any questions come in regards to cover letters?
Yes, we do have two questions about resumes. Um, so the first question is, what if I can't get my resume under 2 pages?
So I would recommend that you give your resume to someone else to look at if they can't help you cut down some of the details that might not be relevant. At a certain point of your career, as I mentioned earlier, it might make sense to have a 2-page resume, but anyone who's in university or just graduated, a 1-page resume is really what you're going to submit, and it will have the most important information for hiring managers to look at. I would encourage you, if you can't get it down to 1 page, to ask someone to do it for you and have those second pair of eyes. And, maybe they can decide if you're adding a little too much information in a certain part of your resume, and maybe you can cut down maybe in your education, or perhaps you don't need to list all your courses. So definitely having a second set of eyes will be helpful for getting your resume down under 2 pages.
Great. We've actually had a couple of other questions come in while you were speaking. So the first question is, what would you advise students who have very little to no professional or volunteer experience to put on their resumes? So for example, in Europe, sometimes there's not the same amount of work during the studies or volunteer work during studies that we have in the States. So should students then put that they were leaders of a youth group, or that they studied flute for 15 years, or what sort of things should they put on their resume in that case? Should they focus on school projects, that kind of thing?
That's actually a great question. So, as you saw that we presented 3 different types of resumes, maybe the functional or hybrid resume would help you to kind of not really focus on only your professional or volunteer experience. Maybe you can even combine like certain school projects that you've done, and highlight those under your education section, or any or educational achievements that you have made while you're in university. Or also, if that doesn't work, then you can also show leadership skills that you may have acquired, or organizational skills that you've done. Maybe you're in some clubs at school, or maybe you created some videos. Let's say like you have a portfolio as well. Those are all things that you can include in your resume, which is also why it would be beneficial for you to work on your LinkedIn profile as well, to include some media and some different tools that to showcase your work and also include it on your resume. So while you don't necessarily need to focus on just your work experience, you can focus on some things you definitely achieved while you're in undergrad, while you're in university, and then maybe also highlight certain classes that you've taken to support um, the internship that you're looking to apply for.
Great. And the last question is, what's the best file format for a resume?
So I will look at, so my recommendation again would be to look at the posting, the job internship posting first and see if they have any recommendations as to how they would like to receive your resume. Sometimes, they want it in a document format, others they want to do PDF. However, I think the most common and the most way that, or the most common way to submit your resume is in a PDF format. And it's great because it can't be edited or moved around. So if there's no information on what file to submit, then I would definitely recommend sending it in a PDF format, just because it will also won't, if you have certain ways you stylize your resume, it won't lose that stylization of your resume, or if you have any margins or rulers, it won't mess it up. So a PDF format is probably the best way to go.
Okay, that was the last question.
Awesome. Okay, so now we're going to go in and talk about cover letters. So before we begin, I wanted to highlight one of the foremost common questions we see about cover letters, or some questions that you might be asking yourself right now. So what is a cover letter? Why is it important? Is it required? And the last one, does anyone read your cover letters? So not many people or not many organizations give feedback on cover letters, so it might feel like no one reads them anyway. So to answer these questions one by one, a cover letter is your first impression to a company. You submit submit it with your resume. It's the first time you can really articulate yourself. And as a person, your resume talks about you, and as a candidate and your skills. Sorry. So as a candidate, your cover letter gives you a chance to talk about yourself and your interests in the role, and you can align the role with your skills a little bit more in depth than you could on a resume. And in addition to this, aside from, just expanding on like what is written on your resume, you can really also provide a personality along with your application. So you can demonstrate likability and a cultural fit within the organization. So you don't simply just repurpose the lines that you've put on your resume. You're going to want to present yourself in a bit of a different way in a cover letter. And it's really important because it's just again, a quick way to introduce yourself to the employer and to give them a taste of who you are and your personality. And it's just not about your skills that you're going to share, because that's already all in your resume. So you want to let whoever is reading know exactly why you're sending them your resume, why you're interested in them, and why you'd like to intern or train with them as an organization. And as far as being whether or not it's required, a cover letter is not necessarily required by every company, but it is best practice. And I would definitely encourage you to write a cover letter, even if it's not required or if it's not specifically mentioned in the job posting. It's definitely more work, but it's really important to do, and it will be helpful for you to think about why you're applying for that internship and why you think you'd be a good fit. And this will essentially, prep you in a way to think in this way, especially when you're having your interview. you want to think about, is this really an organization that I would like to train with? So it definitely helps, I think, reflectively to think about these different opportunities, even if it's not something that's required. And also, it will definitely make you stand out as a candidate if you've gone and if you've done the extra work of writing a cover letter where no one else has. And it just really makes you stand out and makes you more a desirable candidate. And to answer the last question about does anyone read a cover letter, the simple answer is yes. Hiring managers do read cover letters, and sometimes they do read them even before they look at your resume because they want to see who is detail oriented. If it's a job, if you're applying for a job that includes extensive writing, your cover letter is a great example of that writing sample, and they can use it to let the and they can use it in order to see how a candidate presents themselves, and they can see who is more motivated to write these cover letters. So if you're not receiving feedback on them, it's not necessarily not because it's not being read, or maybe you don't know what hiring managers liked or what they didn't like. And the unfortunate reality for this is that you don't know who's reading them, and you may not get feedback. However, if you were to get in contact with that host employer, you could potentially ask them maybe if they have any feedback for them, if they have any time in regards to your cover letter. However, again, it's really important to write these cover letters, and and make sure you go that extra mile. But companies definitely do read those cover letters, even though it seems as if maybe they don't, because they don't provide you with feedback, or they reply to you. They Again, cover letters are an important component of any job or internship or training application. So you do want to submit it with your resume, and and because it is such an important aspect of the application process, we do also want to provide you with some tips for writing cover letters. And they're kind of similar with a resume. So with our resume tips. So we'll go ahead and start with formatting a cover letter. So first things first is that you should address your cover letter to the hiring manager. If it's not apparent in the job posting or in the internship posting, do a little bit of research on the company and see if you can find out who the hiring manager is. It definitely goes a long way, and it shows that you've looked into the company. You're not just submitting a template cover letter, and you've done the research, and you've thought and you've thoughtfully explored why this is a good fit for you. I definitely can't stress enough about proofreading your cover letter. It shows that you are detail oriented, and if there are any mistakes on your cover letter, this will show you that you are in fact not detail oriented, and you definitely don't want to submit a cover letter with any errors. So definitely proofread and look it over. Again, maybe a second pair of eyes will help you to make sure that you are putting your best foot forward, and you're showing that the most important skills that you have as a candidate, and that you are that you are showing that you have important skills as a candidate, and you're not being disrupted, or the hiring manager is not being distracted by some typos or grammatical errors that in your cover letter. And a cover letter needs to be about 3 to 4 paragraphs, so it isn't too detailed, and it doesn't need to be too expansive. The first paragraph is an introduction, and then this the next 2 paragraphs will be your content, and talk about you as a candidate. And then at the end, you'll simply wrap up, just like quick wrap up of your skills. And essentially, your cover letter can really just be really simple. It's professional, but you also want it to be kept honest. And the reason why you want to be obviously be honest is for obvious reasons, but if you write things or you exaggerate things in your cover letter that aren't true, like that's essentially going to come out in the interview. So you want to make sure that you're not exaggerating, you're not putting anything in your cover letter that might sound great, but that might not actually be true, because that won't look good on you as a candidate if that comes out in the future. So you can put a little bit more of your personality in the cover letter that might not be on your resume. So as you're writing your cover letter, you want to show your passion for interning at that company or that position. Specifically, maybe any personal history that you have that connects you with the company. You can also include that in your you can also include what you've written in your resume. It's okay to put a little bit more color, but don't put so much that you're distracting from, again, the job or the internship itself. But you can also put more color in your cover letter. You just don't need to go just so that you can show, that extra pizzazz, that personality of yours, and make you more appealing. You want to relate to the hiring managers, and they want to, get a sense of who you are as you're writing this cover letter to them. Lastly, you don't want to get into any salary discussion. You shouldn't go into you shouldn't go into talks about, whether what kind of salary you're looking for. You also shouldn't go into talking about the J1 visa or any logistics. I think all of those details are definitely important, but to talk about, maybe towards the end of the hiring process, maybe after your interview, if they have any questions, or when they offer you that internship. Um, so, while it's appropriate, maybe towards the end of the hiring process, I would definitely avoid bringing this up at the beginning of the hiring process, especially in your cover letter, because your cover letter is, again, an introduction of you. So you don't need to talk about salary and benefits and visas and all those things that, again, will come later in the process. So with that, I want to go through each of the paragraphs or sections of a cover letter that we discuss and just pull them apart a little bit more in detail. So the introduction, like I said, is kind of like a news story, or is somewhat like a news story. So you want to start off with a strong lead and make sure that you hook the host employer into what you're talking about. You want them to get interested quickly and tell them about yourself and what drew you to the organization, why you're writing to them, and you want to include information here about your area of expertise and your career goals, but in a very quick way, in a sort of as in a way that's like a preview to what you would like to get out of the internship and what you have to talk about. And you'll talk more about some of these points in the bulk part of your cover letter, but basically in the introduction, you're differentiating your application from tons of other cover letters, and you're providing some personality and some um so that when you are called in with a host employer during an interview, they can kind of get a sense of who you are and what you have to offer, and get excited about your personality, and that way they have things to talk about with you, and maybe talk about some past projects that are related, that you find exciting and that they find exciting, so that they want to learn more about you. So you're in that sense, you're kind of giving them a bit of a cheat sheet in your introduction, but about you as a candidate, and then you'll move on into the bigger section, which is the bulk of your cover letter, and essentially the content and the body of your cover letter. So the bulk of your cover letter is about 1 to 2 paragraphs, and this is going to focus more on the skills and knowledge that you have, and how it relates to this position. So think about why they should bring you in and the skills and knowledge, abilities that you have and how it matches what they're looking for. And this has to be apparent in this section or in the body of your cover letter, so that it showcases that you've done your homework and that you've looked into the company and you know what they're looking for. Maybe here you want to you maybe want to reference some important current events related to the company or some history that is going to be relevant to the skills that you're focusing on. You also want to think about, what you bring to the table with the employer's needs in mind. So you might have all these great skills, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it matches what the company is looking for. And the way to make sure that you're able to relate your skills to what the company is looking for is, again, to do some research on the company and focus on their needs within your cover letter and how you fit well with those needs, similar to how a resume uses keywords from the job description that was posted. You'll want to highlight those important key skills, those phrases that they reference a couple times. These are, again, all things that you want to put on the content section of your cover letter. So you want to make sure that you're, again, driving home that you have the tangible skills that they're looking for and include any relevant anecdotes to back that up. So keep the story short, but if you have any anecdotes and experience that relate well, make sure that you do include that in your cover letter. And anything else that is important that you couldn't figure out a way to put on your resume, maybe you were running out of space or something that you do really well and you want to highlight that doesn't really come out great in bullet form. This is something that you can include in your cover letter. But again, I do just want to let you know that, or to remember that the content and the bulk of your cover letter should be about 3 to 4 paragraphs. So you don't want to make your cover letter too long. And you don't want to have some of those important elements of your cover letter to be drowned out by additional noise. So again, like, try to pick out some important anecdotes that you couldn't expand upon in your resume, and then just quickly summarize that in your cover letter that is captivating and that really pulls the hiring manager's attention to who you are. So the last paragraph is the wrap-up section, which ties everything that you've spoken about together, essentially as a summary. So you want to conclude your last paragraph or your wrap-up as why you're the best fit for the position. And then essentially the rest of the paragraph you can probably use as a excuse me, you want to, I'm sorry, try that again. So the last paragraph, you just, again, want to conclude, essentially 1 to 2 sentences why you're the best fit for the position. And you can probably use a template for most cover letters, thanking the hiring managers for their considerations, by showing, again, and by showing that you're excited for the position. I wouldn't have any hard sells at the end by saying that I'll call you next week to set up an interview. Definitely let the host employer make that decision, but be grateful for the time and also ask them for an interview if they could provide you with one, and if they are available. Just, again, show that excitement that you'd be happy to come in. But again, don't initiate saying that I'm going to call you. This is something that probably most hiring managers won't respond well to. So definitely slide it in there that you're interested in speaking with them, request an interview. That shouldn't be any problem at all. And then, if the hiring manager would like to set up an interview with you, again, they can reach you at the contact information that you provided in your resume, and they will let you know that they would like to move forward with you. So that is the cover letter format. Now we're going to talk about the alternative version of cover letters. So most cover letters will follow a simple formula, but there are alternate versions of cover letters. And again, like the alternate versions of resume, this isn't going to apply for everyone, but it's important to know that there are other formats that you can do for a cover letter, and they do exist, and they're pretty easy to put together as well. So we have the employer's needs, and so we have employer's needs and the hybrid. And there are two other versions, excuse me, and these are the two two different versions. So the employer needs is typically used for a higher level applicants or specialists and executives, and it could be very useful if you're proposing an internship or you're looking to create an internship to a company, while the hybrid is for anyone who has some gaps in their experience, maybe a transition between careers or any relevant experience they may not be on their resume. You can kind of use these two interchangeably. You can definitely use an employer needs versus the hybrid, depending again on how developed you are in your career or how many of your skills do relate. But the difference essentially between these two versions in a paragraph format is that employer needs is pretty much two columns. And if the employer needs version and sorry, and the employer needs pretty much is in two columns. So, and while the hybrid begins like a paragraph, but the content section is set up like the employer's needs. So in some industries, you might want to include or want to cite some sample of your work or reference a piece from your portfolio, but nothing too overwhelming. And now we're going to move on to the applicant screening systems. So just like the resumes, cover letters do have some application, or some companies do use applicant screening systems when they are looking through the cover letters that they've received. So these screening systems also are looking for relevant keywords in a job posting. So it's just some advice here. It's just the same advice here with resumes. Make sure you're using the appropriate keywords. Make sure you're using the appropriate file types. You can also do a little bit of research to see if there is a human or computer screener by seeing how many people work in their recruiting department, or if it's going to someone's name at the company, then you know it's probably going to be screened by a human. So again, it's just something to like think about once you're writing your cover letter. Again, similar to the resume, you just want to make sure that you have the relevant keywords, that it's concise, has proper formatting, and it's easy for the computer as well as humans to read. So with that, I wanted to conclude this section about cover letters and do a wrap up on resumes and cover letters, unless there were any additional questions that came in about cover letters. Abby, is there any questions that came in?
Yes, we do have two questions. The first one is that earlier you mentioned making a longer template for resumes so that you can shorten for each job you apply to. Can you do this for cover letters as well?
Yes, you can definitely create a template for your cover letters. Again, it's I would just recommend that you create a standardized template, maybe about certain skills that you think might be relatable across different job functions. However, you want to differentiate each of your cover letters by making sure that you've done your research for specific companies, and then that way you can tailor and edit your cover letters according to the companies that you are applying for. So you don't want it to each cover letter sound the same to every single internship postings that you are applying for. That will just show the hiring manager that you haven't done your work, that you're not really looking to intern with that particular company. So while you can create a template the same way you can create a template for your resume, you can edit and add certain things to your cover letter that would best fit that company or that job position.
Thank you. The last question that came in is, if you are interning as part of the compulsory component of your study, should you mention that in your cover letter?
I wouldn't necessarily say that, that you're looking at this internship just to complete an intern or some credits. I would definitely focus on maybe saying how certain courses relate to that internship field, that that you've taken some courses and this is some things that you've learned, or there's some projects that you've worked on that you feel that you can apply to that internship posting. So things like that. Try to find different ways to say, I'm interested in interning because, I really want to gain more experience. I really want to learn with from that host employer, or whatever it is that you feel like you can apply your academic knowledge to. That makes sense.
Yeah, thank you, Fatima. That was the last question.
Okay, great. So now we're just going to do a wrap-up slide. If there are any other questions, please again type them in the chat box below, but hopefully we've answered some of the biggest questions, and I put them up here in advance of the presentation, assuming that these are some of the most common questions to be asked, and we hope that we've answered them for you. Again, the difference between a resume and a cover letter, whether or not you need to do either or both. I think we touch on whether or not your LinkedIn is enough. And then lastly, if you have a portfolio, do you need a resume, a cover letter, and a portfolio? So in conclusion, again, a resume is an outline of you as a professional. It says why the company might find you a good candidate, whereas a cover letter is a tailored letter that you submit with your resume that says why you're applying for the position. So those are the main differences between the two different documents. So again, should you do either or both? Simple answer is that you should do both. So while a resume is giving you a snapshot of you and whether or not you meet the requirements of the position, the cover letter gives you that chance to express not only do you meet the requirements, but you'd also be a good fit for the team. So definitely you want to include both of those documents and present that to the host employer. So as far as LinkedIn, your LinkedIn is really 75% of the work right there. That showcases all of your skills and all of the experiences that you've had. But you just need to reformat it in a little bit. You still do need a resume unless the job says specifically just to send your LinkedIn profile, and maybe a few jobs will do that. But again, your resume highlights the skills that you have that are relevant to the position, while canceling out any of the additional information and it will make it easier for your host employer to focus on all the important aspects of you professionally. Sorry. So yeah, and then lastly, do you need a resume, a cover letter, and a portfolio? So this really depends in some fields. In some fields, you might already have a portfolio, and if that's the case, you should include your resume and submit your cover letter. So that way you really are able to showcase your work your resume and a cover letter. The portfolio will just essentially support your resume and your cover letter further and show the kinds of things that you have been working on, whether it's in university or any previous internships that you've had. So with that, I just want to quickly show you the next slide for our upcoming webinars. Next week, we have the Build Your Online Presence and Leverage Your LinkedIn Profile. It'll be on Tuesday, February 9th at 2 p.m. And from then on, we'll have our weekly webinars. So if something is of interest of you, definitely feel free to register. We'll send you the registration link in this follow-up email and include any additional resources that you may need to have a very successful cover letter. So with that, hopefully, I wish you all the best, and hopefully that you all are able to land the internship and then apply with career training in the future, and intern in the US. All right, well, thank you guys for your time and have a great day or night wherever you are.